March 14, 2026. 2:47 a.m. Odesa Oblast. A fire control officer sits in a darkened command vehicle. Green phosphor glow on her face. Radar returns, painting the screen in slow sweeps. She has trained for this moment for 11 months. First at Grafenwöhr, Germany, then at a classified facility in Poland, then here, on the outskirts of Ukraine's most important port city, where the Black Sea wind never stops and the alerts never end. Tonight, every hour of that training comes down to 19 seconds. Because at 2:47 a.m., a MiG-31K lifts off from Engels 2 Airbase in Saratov Oblast. It climbs fast, Mach 2.3 within minutes, and beneath its fuselage hangs a weapon Russia has called unstoppable since 2018, the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, hypersonic, air-launched ballistic, terminal velocity exceeding Mach 10, a weapon designed to arrive before you can react. Russia is about to find out that Ukraine reacts faster than anyone predicted. I'm your host at Ukraine Signal, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're breaking down the most complex air defense engagement of the entire war. A single Patriot battery, one crew, 19 seconds between detection and impact, and a decision that saved Odesa's port, its infrastructure, and potentially hundreds of lives. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine Signal. To understand what happened over Odesa on March 14th, you need to understand what Russia was trying to do. Because this wasn't a random missile launch. This was a carefully orchestrated combined strike designed around one principle: overwhelm and destroy. Russian Aerospace Forces planners built this attack in 3 layers. Layer 1, 63M14. Kalibr cruise missiles launched from a Project 636.3 Kilo class submarine operating in the eastern Mediterranean west of Cyprus. These missiles fly at roughly 900 kilometers per hour, hugging terrain at altitudes below 50 meters once they reach land. Flight time to Odesa from that launch position, approximately 90 minutes. Layer 2, 4 Kh-101 air-launched cruise missiles fired from 2 Tu-95 EMS strategic bombers orbiting over the Caspian Sea. The Kh-101 is stealthier than the Kalibr, with a reduced radar cross-section and a flight profile that uses waypoint navigation to approach from unexpected angles. Flight time, approximately 110 minutes. Layer 3, the Kinzhal, 1 missile. Launched from a MiG-31K operating at high altitude over Saratov Oblast, roughly 900 kilometers northeast of Odesa. Flight time, under 12 minutes. Which element of this strike was most dangerous? A. The Kalibr wave. B. The Kinzhal spearhead. C. The Kh-101 flanking approach. Drop your answer in the comments. The sequencing was deliberate. The Kinzhal would arrive first. Its target was the Patriot battery itself. Destroy the air defense, then let the slower cruise missiles fly into an undefended city. It's a tactic Russia had attempted before, notably in Kyiv in May 2023, when a Kinzhal was intercepted for the first time, but each attempt refined the approach. This time, Russia added a wrinkle. The submarine-launched Kalibrs were fired first, nearly 80 minutes before the Kinzhal launch. This meant Ukrainian radar operators would detect the cruise missile threat early, forcing them to allocate attention and potentially interceptors toward the incoming Kalibrs. Then the Kinzhal would arrive during that window of divided focus, screaming down at Mach 10 while operators were tracking slower targets from the south. On paper, it was a sound plan. Russian military doctrine calls this a complex fire strike, multiple weapon types arriving from multiple vectors within a compressed time window. The goal isn't just destruction, it's cognitive overload, but Ukrainian Air Defense Command had studied this exact playbook. The Patriot battery station near Odesa was not a standard deployment. This was a PAC-3 MSE configuration, the most advanced variant of the Patriot system, equipped with hit-to-kill interceptors designed specifically for ballistic missile defense. The crew had been among the first Ukrainians trained on the system at the U.S. Army's Air Defense School in Grafenwöhr, completing a condensed but intensive program that normally takes American crews significantly longer. By March 2026, this crew had already participated in over 40 live engagements against various Russian missile types. They had intercepted Iskander-M ballistic missiles, Kalibr cruise missiles, and Kh-22 legacy anti-ship missiles repurposed for land attack. They knew the radar signatures, They knew the flight profiles. They understood the system's capabilities at a level that comes only from sustained combat experience layered on top of formal training. The battery commander, a lieutenant colonel whose name remains classified, had implemented a standing protocol for exactly this scenario. The protocol was simple in concept, brutal in execution. If a ballistic trajectory threat was detected while cruise missiles were inbound, the battery would prioritize the ballistic target. No hesitation, no committee decision. The fire control officer had pre-delegated authority to engage. That fire control officer was a 28-year-old captain. Before the war, she had been an electrical engineering student at a university in Kharkiv. 2 years of war had turned her into one of the most experienced air defense operators in any NATO-aligned military. Stay with me. What happens in the next 11 minutes of this engagement determines whether Odesa's port survives the night. At 2:41 a.m., Ukrainian signals intelligence detected the submarine-launched Kalibr volley, 6 missiles tracking northwest from the Mediterranean. Their projected flight path brought them across Turkish airspace, which they would skirt just barely, then over the Black Sea, toward the Odesa coastline. Estimated time of arrival over the city, approximately 4:12 a.m. Air Defense Command across southern Ukraine went to full alert. Multiple systems activated, S-300 batteries, NASAMS units, Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns for terminal defense. The air defense network stretched from Mykolaiv to Odesa began preparing engagement solutions for the Kalibr wave. At 2:44 a.m., the two Tu-95MS bombers were detected by NATO surveillance aircraft operating over the Black Sea. 4 Kh-101 launches were confirmed. These missiles were tracking southwest, following a longer route that would bring them toward Odesa from the northeast, opposite the direction of the Kalibr approach. Estimated arrival, approximately 4:35 a.m. The picture was forming. 10 cruise missiles approaching from 2 directions. A classic pincer. Ukrainian operators had dealt with this before. Then everything changed. 2:47 a.m. The Patriot battery's AN/MPQ-65A radar scanning the eastern horizon detected a new contact. High altitude, extreme velocity, descending trajectory. The radar classified it automatically. Tactical ballistic missile. But the velocity was wrong for an Iskander. Too fast. The fire control system recalculated. Mach 8, Mach 9. Accelerating. The fire control officer recognized the profile. This was a Kinzhal. She had seen this signature in training simulations. She had studied the interception over Kyiv from 2023, analyzed the radar data, memorized the engagement envelope. Her training had prepared her for a 30-second engagement window. Tonight, she would have even less. The Kinzhal was in its terminal descent phase, dropping from an altitude above 40 kilometers at a near vertical angle. At this velocity, the missile would cover the remaining distance to Odesa in seconds. The radar established a valid track at 87 kilometers. 87 kilometers. At Mach 10, that distance disappears in approximately 19 seconds. The captain didn't hesitate. She activated the engagement sequence. 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors were selected. The system calculated an intercept solution, she confirmed. 2 missiles left the launchers. The PAC-3 MSE is a remarkable piece of engineering. Unlike earlier Patriot variants that used proximity-fused warheads to explode near a target, the MSE uses hit-to-kill technology. It physically collides with the incoming missile. At closing speeds exceeding Mach 15, there is no margin for error. The interceptor uses a combination of aerodynamic fins and a pulse motor array, 180 tiny solid-fuel rockets arranged around the missile's body, to make last-millisecond course corrections during the final approach. The first PAC-3 MSE tracked perfectly through its mid-course phase. Its onboard seeker acquired the Kinzhal. It adjusted. It closed. It missed by 3 meters. 3 meters. At those velocities, 3 meters might as well be 3 kilometers. The interceptor streaked past the Kinzhal and self-destructed. The fire control officer watched the first interceptor's track terminate. She had no time to process the failure. The second missile was already in terminal approach. How many seconds remained? The answer at the end of this video will give you the full technical breakdown. But for now, understand this. The margin between interception and catastrophe was measured in single-digit seconds. The second PAC-3 MSE adjusted its trajectory. Its seeker locked onto the Kinzhal's radar return. The pulse motor array fired in a precise sequence, nudging the interceptor fractions of a degree. Contact. At approximately 20 kilometers altitude, the PAC-3 MSE struck the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal, a direct hit to kill. The kinetic energy of a head-on collision at combined speeds exceeding Mach 15 disintegrated both objects instantly. The debris field scattered over agricultural land east of Odesa, titanium fragments, burned composite material, the remnants of what Russia considers its most advanced missile, falling into sunflower fields and irrigation ditches. The time was 2:48 a.m. The entire engagement, from detection to intercept, had lasted approximately 19 seconds, but the night was far from over. Subscribe to Ukraine Signal if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what happened next required the same crew to do something almost as difficult as intercepting a hypersonic missile, they had to immediately pivot to a completely different type of engagement. The Kinzhal was down, but 10 cruise missiles were still inbound. The battery commander ordered an immediate system reset. Interceptor magazines were checked. The radar was reconfigured for low-altitude tracking. The crew transitioned from ballistic missile defense to cruise missile defense in under 4 minutes. At 4:07 a.m., the first Kalibr cruise missile crossed the coastline south of Odesa. It was flying at approximately 20 meters altitude, using terrain masking to avoid detection as long as possible. The Patriot battery acquired it at 34 kilometers. 2 PAC-3 MSE interceptors launched. The first Kalibr was destroyed over the Black Sea coast. Over the next 28 minutes, the Patriot battery engaged 3 more Kalibrs. 2 were destroyed. 1 was handed off to a NASAMS battery operating closer to the port, which engaged it with 2 AMRAAM missiles and scored a hit at 8 kilometers from the target. The remaining 2 Kalibrs were engaged by S-300 PS batteries positioned further west. Both were intercepted. 6 Kalibrs launched, 6 destroyed. The Kh-101 wave arrived later at approximately 4:31 a.m., approaching from the northeast. These were engaged by a combination of systems. The Patriot battery took 1. NASAMS units accounted for 2 more. The 4th Kh-101 was engaged by a mobile firing group using a Buk M1 system and was struck at 12 kilometers from the port perimeter. 4 Kh-101s launched, 4 destroyed. By 5:15 a.m., the engagement was over. 11 Russian missiles fired, 11 intercepted. 0 reached their targets. Odesa's port was intact, the grain terminal, the container handling facilities, the fuel storage, all of it standing. Workers would arrive for the morning shift without knowing how close the infrastructure had come to destruction. If you believe tactics win wars, type Ukraine Signal in the comments, because what this crew achieved in a single night represents something Russia still cannot comprehend. The aftermath told a devastating story for Russian planners. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense released the engagement radar data within 72 hours. This was only the second confirmed Kinzhal interception of the entire war. The first, over Kiev in May 2023, had been partially doubted by Russian sources claiming the intercepted missile was actually an Iskander. This time, the evidence was unambiguous. Debris analysis confirmed Kinzhal-specific components, including fragments of the missile's unique fuel system designed for sustained hypersonic flight. NATO analysts at Allied Air Command in Ramstein reviewed the data. Their assessment, portions of which were shared with journalists, called it the most complex air defense engagement since the conflict began. Not because of the Kinzhal alone, but because of the full picture. A single battery crew transitioning from hypersonic ballistic missile defense to cruise missile defense within minutes, engaging multiple threat types from multiple vectors, and achieving a perfect interception rate. The cost analysis was equally striking. Russia expended an estimated $280 to $320 million in munitions during this single strike. The Kinzhal alone is estimated to cost between $10 and $15 million. 6 Kalibrs at roughly $6.5 million each. 4 Kh-101s at approximately $13 million each. Plus the operational costs of submarine deployment, bomber sorties, and MiG-31K flight operations. The result of that expenditure: 0 damage to any targeted infrastructure. Intercepted Russian military communications, shared through Ukrainian intelligence channels, revealed the reaction at the command level. A senior Russian Aerospace Forces officer reportedly described the result as operationally catastrophic. The entire strike package had been assembled over weeks, with the submarine repositioning from its base in Tartus, Syria, and the two 95 MS bombers staging from angles too specifically for this mission. All of it wasted. The Kinzhal had been Russia's trump card. Since its public debut in 2018, the Kremlin had promoted it as invincible. President Putin personally described it as a weapon that no existing defense system could intercept. Russian state media amplified this claim relentlessly. The Kinzhal was supposed to be the great equalizer, the weapon that rendered Western air defense investments meaningless. Odesa proved otherwise. Again. What would NATO have done differently in this scenario? Comment your analysis below. The tactical lessons from March 14th extend far beyond a single night over Odesa. First, the myth of the unstoppable hypersonic missile is functionally dead. The Kinzhal is fast. Mach 10 is extraordinary velocity, but speed alone does not guarantee survivability against a well-trained crew operating a modern system designed for exactly this threat. The PAC-3 MSE was engineered to intercept ballistic missiles traveling at comparable velocities. The Kinzhal, despite its hypersonic label, follows a quasi-ballistic trajectory in its terminal phase that makes it vulnerable to systems built for ballistic missile defense. The key variable was never the technology. It was the crew. 19 seconds is not much time, but it is enough time for an operator who has rehearsed this engagement hundreds of times, who understands the radar signatures, who has pre-delegated authority to fire, and who does not freeze when the screen shows a contact moving at 3 kilometers per second. Second, Russia's combined strike doctrine has a fundamental weakness. The approach assumes that cognitive overload will degrade defender performance. But Ukrainian air defense crews have been operating under sustained missile attack for over 3 years. They have adapted. They have developed protocols specifically for managing multiple simultaneous threats. The stress that Russian planners assume will paralyze defenders has instead become the operating environment Ukrainian crews consider normal. Third, the importance of layered defense was demonstrated perfectly. No single system defended Odesa that night. The Patriot handled the Kinzhal and several cruise missiles. NASAMS engaged others. S-300 batteries covered sectors. A Buk M1 unit contributed. This is the integrated air defense network that Ukraine has built, piece by piece, combining Soviet-era systems with Western platforms in ways that no military had ever attempted before. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. And on March 14th, that innovation extended to air defense integration, creating a seamless network from equipment donated by half a dozen countries, operated by crews trained across 3 continents, defending a city that Russia has tried to destroy for over 3 years. The fire control officer who made the shot, the 28-year-old captain from Kharkiv, reportedly returned to the command vehicle after the engagement and told her crew one sentence: "Reload. They'll try again." She was right. They always try again. Now, the answer to the question from earlier in this video: how many seconds remained between the first interceptor's miss and the second interceptor's hit? Based on the engagement geometry published by Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, the first PAC-3 MSE passed the Kinzhal at approximately 24 kilometers altitude. The second interceptor struck at approximately 20 kilometers. Given the Kinzhal's terminal velocity of roughly Mach 10, the 4-kilometer altitude difference between the first miss and the second hit translates to approximately 1.2 seconds. The margin between success and failure was barely more than 1 second. 1 second. That is what separated Odesa from devastation. 1 second, and the training to use it. 3 questions remain. Was the decision to fire 2 interceptors simultaneously the right call? Or should the crew have staggered the launches to preserve ammunition? Could Russia have improved its chances by launching 2 Kinzhals instead of 1, forcing the Patriot to split its engagement capability? What would you have done differently if you were the fire control officer with 19 seconds on the clock? Subscribe to Ukraine Signal, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. Real tactics, real consequences. Ukraine Signal. The fields east of Odesa are quiet now. Farmers have returned to the land where titanium fragments fell from the sky on a cold March morning. The sunflowers are not yet planted for the season, but the soil has been turned. Life continues. In Odesa, the port cranes move containers onto cargo ships. Grain flows out through the corridor that Ukraine has defended with blood and ingenuity. The city's lights stay on. The cafes along Deribasovskaya Street open each morning. But somewhere on the outskirts, concealed beneath camouflage netting that shifts in the Black Sea wind, a Patriot battery sits in ready status. Its crew rotates in 8-hour shifts. The radar never stops scanning. The magazines are always loaded. They know Russia will try again. They know the next Kinzhal is already being assembled at a factory somewhere deep inside Russia. They know the next submarine is already positioning in the Mediterranean. And they know something else. Something that no amount of Russian hypersonic technology can change. They've done this before. They'll do it again. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy. Stay vigilant.